Welcome to the On the Edge podcast with your host, Scott Groves.
Hey, ladies and gentlemen, it's Scott Groves with the On the Edge podcast. As you may have noticed, if you're watching this on video, I've cut down on the cigar smoking, so this is not being filmed in my garage. It's being filmed in my office. But today we've got a new friend of mine, Dr. Chris DeArmitt. And I don't know if you're the smartest because we haven't spoken yet, but you're definitely the most educated person that we've had on this podcast, because when I looked you up, it was Chris DeArmitt, PhD, and then a whole lot of other initials after that. So I'm going to write this, that you are an American, but grew up in the UK. So you have a great British accent, which, I don't know, to me just makes you sound more authoritative. Is a British polymer scientist renowned for his expertise in plastics, functional fillers, innovation, and the environmental impacts of polymers, which is like really big. I can't open Instagram without seeing an article about how men have plastics in their balls these days. So I wanted to ask about that in a bit. But widely recognized as one of the leading independent experts on plastic, which doesn't sound like a interesting topic at its face value until you realize our whole world runs on plastic, and constantly and frequently consulting Fortune 100 companies on breakthrough solutions to complex technical challenges. That, my friend, is what AI told me about you. But now I want to hear from you. Like, what is your background, and how does a young man say, you know what I want to spend my life doing? I want to write some best-selling books on plastics, one calling The Plastics Paradox and Shattering the Plastic Illusion, and work with polymers my whole life. So tell us the story of Dr. Chris and how this all got started.
I love it. Thanks, Scott. So the first thing to say is that I was convinced over a large bottle of cider during my undergraduate days. You had to pick, so I was doing a PhD in an undergraduate degree in chemistry, and you had to pick a minor. So you could do chemistry with economics, chemistry with French, which sounded crazy to me, or chemistry with polymer science. And we got this professor, Norman Billingham, who's really famous. He sat down next to me with a 2-liter bottle of cider and explained why I should do polymer science, because that was his thing. And he had the alcohol, so he was very persuasive. And he was right. He said basically a bunch of chemists, like half of them end up working with plastic somehow, but only like a few % are actually trained in it. So there's always more demand than supply. And that was enough to convince me. And he was a brilliant teacher, absolutely brilliant. And that's part of what I do now. He was fantastic at distilling down complex, boring scientific things into really easy terms, so any even drunk student could understand it. So that's that part of it. So my whole career, as you said, has been as a plastic scientist, working with plastic materials, making them better, solving problems. And the thing I'm talking to you about today and the book writing is not even my job. This is something I got into completely by chance only 5 years ago. One day when my daughters walked through the door right next to me here from school, and they've been told by their teachers, plastics don't degrade. And that's just an outright lie. I mean, we spend $5 billion a year on stabilizers for plastics, and we wouldn't do that if they were stable, right? It doesn't make sense. They're made of carbon-carbon bonds, just like you and I are, and just like apples are, and trees, right? It's the same chemistry. So why would they suddenly be... World Wildlife Fund tells us it takes 500 years for a bag to degrade, and it degrades in less than a year, according to peer-reviewed science, where they actually did the experiment. So that made me angry because we pay a lot of property tax. My wife actually pays it. She's just got the bill this week. And we're here to be in a good school district. I'm not here to pay a large sum of money for my kids to be taught lies at school. I found that deeply unamusing as a scientist. And so I thought, well, if the thing about degradation is a lie, and I was on 60 Minutes with Scott Pelley talking about plastic degradation. So that's one of the topics that I was an expert in. But then people would say, okay, I get the degradation part. What about toxicity? What about litter? What about waste? What about the oceans? I didn't know any of that stuff. So now I've read 5,000, I got a bit carried away. I've read 5,000 studies, unfunded, and then I had to get it off my chest. So I wrote this first book, which I was convinced. It's called
5 years ago, you have a quote unquote normal job. You're a working man. You got kids, and you're like, you know what I'm going to do in all my free time? I'm going to read 5,000 papers on plastic.
Yeah. Well, if you told me that in the beginning, I never would have done it. But it was kind of like one of those things that creeps up on you. I'm sure you have hobbies, like you mentioned, smoking cigars or whatever. You have things that start off innocent and then they kind of spiral out of control. I first read 400 studies to do the plastics paradox, to cover all the science. And to be a good scientist, what you have to do is read all the evidence and then make up your mind. Regular people do it the other way around. They make up their mind and then they go find some evidence to match what they want to believe. And that's a lot less work. Doing it the real way, the way I did it, is a lot more work. So I wrote this book and I was convinced nobody would read it. And then I was somewhat shocked and appalled when people did start reading it and started translating it into other languages and spreading it all around the world and printing thousands of copies to give away for free. And I allowed them to do that. Both of my books are for free, by the way. So people assume I'm here selling a book. All my books are for free. I got 3 of them. The first one was on innovation. So anyway, that's how I got started. I did the plastics paradox and I thought, right, that's off my chest. I'm not angry anymore. I vented. And then it sort of took off. And so 5 years later, professors wrote to me and said, hey, I use your book to teach my students. And can you write an update and tell us the latest science? Because especially about microplastics, which has become a hot topic.
Yeah, so your third book, but the second one that we're kind of talking about, Shattering the Plastic Illusion. Why is this important, right? Like, I'm not going to overstate that this has become your life work, but for 5 years, it seems like this has been some of your life's work. Why is it so important to shatter the plastic illusion of this idea? Like, I know if I leave a plastic bag in my front yard, it's going to degrade in a year with the hot sun here in Las Vegas and the water and whatnot. I know it's not going to last 500 years, but I'm not smart enough or educated enough to know, okay, well, did that degrade into little tiny pieces of plastic that went into my yard and is now going to kill it and kill my dog and one day kill my kids? So why is there the illusion, and why are you so passionate about refuting that?
Yeah. So one thing to say is I'm not especially passionate about the environment. I'm not especially passionate about plastics. I don't want to defend plastics either. I think people should buy exactly what they want to. I would always pick a glass bottle or a aluminum can, as you say in America, over a plastic one because I like the feel in my hand. But what I'm not keen on is the government taxing and banning the solution that has the least harm. Why should we be told by the government what to do? And why should we be paying extra for things that are actually increasing harm, like the cotton bag and so forth? So that's what I'm against. I'm against people who care doing things that make things worse based on misinformation. So everyone should have the right to have proper information, proper scientific information, so they can make wise choices, whatever it's for. If you want to buy a cotton bag because you like cotton, do it, right? Buy a cashmere bag if you want. I don't care. But don't do it because you were lied to. That's my big thing.
So let's go on that one example right there, right? Because I have been told as a previous California resident that plastic is the devil and we have to start charging for plastic bags because it's going to go into this fund that saves the environment, which turns out it didn't. It's just an extra tax on the system because California loves to tax. So why don't we just go with that one example of why scientifically a cotton bag or a cloth bag, even if you can reuse it 100 times, 1,000 times, whatever, is more of a detriment to the environment, right, than a plastic bag would be. Can you break that down? Because I think anybody who has an environmental bone in their body heard that and just rolled their eyes.
Yeah. So the only way to know what causes more or less impact is a thing called a lifecycle analysis, LCA for short. And that's used by governments, by NGOs, by companies. It's the only way to scientifically add up how much energy did I need to make this car? You know, if you wanted to know if a gas car or an electric car was greener, right? You add up all the energy needed, and then you look at how much fuel was needed during the lifetime of the car as well. So it's not just making it, it's the whole lifetime and repairs and then disposal at the end, the amount of water needed, the amount of pollution created, the amount of waste at the end. Everything's added up. It's shockingly complicated, and that's been used for decades now. So it's all like tuned up. There's standards, so you can't cheat. It has to be peer reviewed, so the experts check that you didn't try to cheat. And that's the only way to know what causes more harm or what causes less harm, because everything has some impact, right? The only way to cause no impact is to dig a hole in your garden and go and jump in it. No one's doing that. So the only rational way to make up your mind is a life cycle study. And if you look at bags, I've never seen so many studies as there are on grocery bags. There are 30 in the world. Canada, America, Denmark, Sweden, France, everywhere has done these studies, 30 in the world. Everyone ever done says that the plastic bag has least impact. Every study ever done by anybody in the history of the world. And you can find them in 2 seconds, right? Like Clemson did one. You could type LCA BAG in Google right now, and you'll get PDFs of these studies. So it makes you wonder, why has no government official in the whole history of the world, or the World Wildlife Fund or Greenpeace, why have these people who think that they know what they're doing and want to tell us what to do, why have they never done a Google search that takes 3 seconds to go and find the science before they make choices? That's a little bit fishy.
Okay, now I'm going to do this real time because I want to see this. You said,
yeah, do it.
Okay, so I'm going to go to Google and I'm going to do Clemson study on, what did you say?
LCA bag.
LCA bag. And there it is, 2014, peer reviewed, life cycle assessment of grocery bags in common use.
Right. And that's how I found these studies, right? I don't have some, people think they write to me for these studies. People from Fortune 100 companies ask me for these studies. I'm like, have you got Google? Why are you writing to me? I'm working alone, unpaid here in my office. You've got like 1,000 PhDs. Why don't you Google it yourself?
Yeah. Even the Google AI overview, which I would say Google has its own problems and how it presents information. It says a Clemson University study on grocery bags found that paper bags, while sometimes touted as more environmentally friendly, actually have a greater global warming potential than traditional plastic bags in most cases. And they also have greater impacts on other environmental categories. The study, which uses a detailed life cycle assessment approach, which you just talked about, compared the environmental impacts of different types of bags and found that plastic was the best.
Yeah.
It took me 3 seconds, and I'm a moron who barely made it out of high school.
Me too. I was a moron when I started too. So that's what shocked me, right? And I'm obsessive, as you can tell. I found 30 studies. No one else has ever been that dumb. And then I didn't stop there, right? Because I'm not a life cycle expert, right? It's like a medical doctor, right? You have your specialties. So I sent 30 studies to a life cycle analysis expert. That's what he does for a living, Neil Shackleton at Medulla. And he analyzed them all, and he wrote a statement saying, yes, every study ever done shows that plastic has the lowest impact. And as you just said, people just want to hate plastic, right? So they'll say, oh, well, maybe it has the lowest greenhouse gas, but what about the waste? What about the litter? What about the effect on the oceans? And as you just read, there are several studies there, and plastic has the least impact in pretty much every one of the categories. So people are I don't know. They're just against plastic for other reasons, I guess. And I've gone into some of the reasons why that might be. But yeah, so there are studies on bags, 30. There are studies on straws. Plastics. The greenest straw is no straw, right? You don't have to be Einstein to work that out. Just don't take a straw, right? And the second greenest is the plastic, and then reuse it as many times as you can. Because no one's making us do it single use, right? No one makes us throw it away. Nobody stands there with a gun and says, put that in the trash. So my daughter reused one 50 times. So you can tell I'm not here to sell plastic, because here's a couple of amazing things for you. A, I'm just told you not to use any straw. And B, here's a funny thing. New Jersey banned bags despite 30 studies saying it would be a bad idea. 2 years later, they checked to see the effect of the bag ban. They found they used the word exponentially increased greenhouse gas, which is what the study said, and they sold way more plastic. So if I was here on behalf of the plastic industry, I would be in favor of bag bans, because you sell way more plastic. Because that super thin Kroger bag that you can see through, when that's no longer available because some idiot in the government banned it, now you have to go and buy a trash can liner, because, you know, people reuse that for their little trash cans in their bathroom. Yeah. They have to go and buy a real trash can liner, which is 5 times thicker plastic. Yeah. So that's the kind of crazy nonsense that happens when people make ideological decisions based on no information.
So is this just an emotional attachment because somebody said it and then it's like a game of telephone where it spreads like wildfire? Or I'm like a very conspiracy-minded libertarian. I'm always thinking about follow the money. Yeah. Who has a vested interest in trying to ban plastics?
Yeah. Well, there are 3 main factors that I've come up with. One is that it's public information that Michael Bloomberg is funding an organization called Beyond Plastics. And if you look at what they do, they just trash plastic all the time. It's just a smear campaign against plastic. And when you check the things that they say, they're just not true. But they've testified in front of Congress and said things which are just wildly misleading. And it's funded by a billionaire for ideological reasons. And there's another organization called Minderoo, and that's funded by iron and steel billionaires. Oh, guess what? The competition made their own NGO to make up crazy stuff about plastic. So partly it's competing industries, part of it's billionaires with too much more money than sense and ideological misunderstandings, and partly it's the green groups. Nobody's doing more harm than the biggest environmental groups. Literally, the president of Greenpeace left, and he said their business model is to tell lies for donations. They gave up on the environment years ago, according to him.
Who was that left? Do you know his name by chance?
Yeah, Dr. Patrick Moore. You can look it up. He's written 2 books about it. They're behind me. Confessions of a Greenpeace Dropout and Fake Invisible Disasters. And he's written also a business report about their business models. I can send them to you.
Oh, my goodness. Okay, so oh, man, I have so many directions we could go here, right? The last question, I guess, on this conspiracy side, or why, is it because the plastic industry is tied to the oil industry? I mean, plastic is basically made from the oil industry, right? So if you hate Exxon Valdez because they dropped 1 billion gallons of oil or 1 million gallons of oil into the ocean, then you should ipso facto hate plastic. Is that part of it for the Greenpeace nut job?
It's a big part of it. So, for example, I just mentioned Michael Bloomberg, right? He funds a thing called Beyond Petrochemicals because he's against oil, right? And so that would make sense. He would fund Beyond Plastics too, because it's part of it uses 4% of oil is used to make plastic. So that makes total sense until you check the science. And here's the funny thing. I made a LinkedIn post called Bloomberg's Blooper, right? Because when you check the oil usage and plastic reduces oil consumption. It has lower fossil fuel consumption than metal, than glass, than paper. And if you actually look at the total net effect of plastic use, You need 4% of oil to make plastic, but because it makes our cars lighter and our airplanes lighter, because it prevents food waste and it insulates our home, so we need less heating oil, you end up saving more than that 4% by using the plastic. So the net effect of plastic is to reduce fossil fuel consumption, which means Michael Bloomberg is spending millions of dollars to campaign against his own wishes. That's how dumb this is, because nobody's checking the facts. I wish I was so rich that I could spend $1 million to campaign against myself.
Oh man, as somebody, like I said, who barely made it through high school, was never thinking about going into chemistry, this is the type of information that people need, because yeah, it's very emotionally rewarding to be like, I love the environment, I want my kids to have a healthy environment. Cool, you want me to use paper instead of plastic? Great. But little do most people know they're doing more harm than good.
Yeah, that's the sad thing. Some of the people with the biggest hearts and the best intentions are vigorously doing the thing that, spending more money to do things that make things worse. And yeah, that's really, really sad. And you can't get through to them. It's like a cult religion, right? They're just against plastic no matter how much evidence you show them. They're convinced that they're right and the expert's wrong. So that's kind of sad as well. There's a place for passion, but before you're passionate, make sure you're right? That's the problem. People are passionate based on headlines.
Right now, on both sides of the aisle, we see this a lot in America. They're much better at selling their program and garnering votes over passion versus, actual facts. So I love that. So
here's another important point to what you just said. Sorry to interrupt you, but a lot of this is, as you just said, virtue signaling. People want to feel good about themselves. And so they actually looked at what do people believe? They think the number one thing they can do to help the environment is bags. And then they looked at what would actually help the environment. The things that actually would make the most impact are driving less, flying less, and eating less meat. And the trouble with those things is nobody wants to do them because it means an actual sacrifice. So the reason people wander around the supermarket doing a lasso effect with their cotton bag and say, look at me, I'm a wonderful person, I've got a cotton bag. It's about showing everyone what a great person they are without making any of the sacrifices it would take to actually be a good person. That's what's going on here. They want something that makes them look good without any actual sacrifice to themselves.
So you mentioned the word microplastic, which I'm sure until 10 years ago wasn't even a term in our lexicon. And now, I'm sure if I searched it on Google, there'd be 100 million search results for microplastic. Can you explain what a microplastic is and what's real and what's fake about the environmental argument over microplastics? Or is this just a made up word?
Oh, it is a made-up word, yeah. So I'm probably the world's number one independent expert on that. And that sounds like a boast, but it isn't. It means that I'm the only person stupid enough to read 500 studies unpaid on microplastics. And so it turns out that it's just part of dust, right? Every other particle that we breathe or eat, we call it dust. And we don't think about it. We're breathing in, you and I have breathed in 100,000 particles each since we started talking, right? Nobody cares. All safe, nobody's worried about it, even though some of that dust is toxic, right? It's got lead in it, arsenic, cadmium. It's got wood dust in it. Did you know that gives you cancer?
No.
If you breathe wood dust, you get cancer. Leather dust, if you breathe that, it gives you cancer. Nobody's banning cows or trees, right? Because even though those things are actually toxic. So we're breathing in all these particles. If you get too many of them in you, some of them are especially toxic and nobody cares. And we call it all dust. We call leather dust, we call it wood dust. You search for micro glass, search for micro metal, search for micro leaf. It doesn't exist. There's no such word. So some scientist took plastic dust, which is an incredibly small fraction of dust, and suddenly gave it a word and then started demonizing it and scaring everyone based on nothing. This stuff is non-toxic. And let me give you an example of that. Plastic is 0.001% of dust that we're breathing and eating. Right? And it's non-toxic. How non-toxic is it? It's as non-toxic as the safest things we know, like clay from soil and like cellulose, which is what trees are made of. You could eat, they did this experiment on mice, right? They fed rats 5% PET, 5% polyethylene. These safety tests have been done for decades, right? For months, nothing happened. You could literally eat a cup load of plastic every day for breakfast and nothing would happen to you apart from you might lose some weight from replacing your breakfast with plastic that doesn't have any calorific value. It just goes right through you. So people think this is some new unrecognized threat. It's not new. We've got 50 years of data. It's not unrecognized. We've got 1,000 studies and it's not a threat because it's non-toxic. So that's how out of whack everything is. And here's the sad part. We're spending $200 million a year of our tax money doing microplastic studies, which are just complete bogus science, which should never be done. It's just a complete waste of money because we already have the answers.
So wait, of the crap that I'm ingesting or breathing in or some flakes that come off of my plastic cutting board, which is like, it's a sin in modern America to have a plastic cutting board because it means you're killing your children. You're saying 0.001% of that is plastic.
0.001% of dust that you breathe and eat is plastic, yeah.
And it's non-toxic.
Right, and it's non-toxic. You could eat 70 grams a day. You could eat a coffee cup of it a day if you wanted to. Nothing happens to you. So people think this is like untested. Are you kidding me? You think the FDA is allowing us to eat off of plastic plates and have plastic knives and forks and straws and glasses and PET bottles without any testing? There's whole books on this stuff, right? We've got thousands and thousands of studies of not just the safety of the material itself, but also the additives in it, completely safe as well. And that's all in my book, by the way, Shattering the Plastics Illusion. Just Google that, and the book's for free. You can read it online. It's all in there, all the safety data. And I quote every study verbatim. I literally copy and paste from the study, so there's no spin on it. It's the literal words of the author with a link so you can go read it yourself.
All right, we have to get to the one plastic conversation that does pull at my emotional heartstrings, because I grew up ditching high school to go surfing. Every time I'm around the ocean, I just feel more alive. Hawaii is my favorite place. The floating island of plastic, right? All the plastic that goes into our ocean. You can understand how a layman like me that has not read 500 or 5,000 studies and barely made it out of high school could say, oh, plastic in the ocean, the fish eat the plastic, I eat the fish, that can't be good for us. Should I be eating sushi? Blah, 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 blah. You know, this poor part of the ocean where all the plastic is congregating. Like, it tells a good story, right? It scares me, and I think I'm pretty rational, if not educated. So is there a floating plastic island? Is it destroying and killing all the mammals? Because we've all seen the Instagram video that pulls at your heartstring where the straw is stuck in the turtle's nose, or, you know, the fish has a wrapper of a 6-pack of beer around them, and they're probably going to die from that, right? Because it's environmental change to how they normally live. But like, the microplastics aren't killing the turtles. What's going on with the plastic in the ocean?
Yes. Many things to say there, right? So first of all, there is no floating island. That was a translation error. So the Russian newspaper, so there's a PhD by Kim DeWolf about how this myth came to be. Like, she literally went and interviewed the guy who found the gyre, right? I think it's Captain Cook or Captain Moore, one or the other. And so he's got his own book. But anyway, she interviewed this guy, and all day long, journalists are saying, sail me out to the island with my, photographer so I can take a picture of this thing. There's not a picture of this thing in the history of the universe. There's not a single satellite image of this floating. Do you think we can't find a floating island the size of Texas with a satellite? You can see a cigarette package on the floor with a satellite these days. That's the resolution of it, and they can't find a floating island the size of Texas. Even the American government, the NOAA, the Ocean Authority, Diana Parker said, you can swim through it. You don't even know you're in it. That's how little plastic is there. And don't get me wrong, right? I'm not saying there should be plastic, but we shouldn't invent a floating island just to get donations from gullible people, right? That would be a bad idea. And if you do ever find a picture of what's claimed to be the gyre, it's actually a picture taken from the tsunami in when was that? It doesn't really matter. But anyway, there was a tsunami in Japan where you can see a bunch of wood floating around. So some people use that as a picture. And you can see,
if you just Google plastic floating island, you get a lot of pictures of things right off the coast of clearly one of these countries.
Yes. And you can't exactly. That's exactly the right thing to say. You cannot see the shore from where the gyres are. So any picture that shows any land in the background is just not a picture of that. So there's a whole PhD thesis about how that came to be. Here's another problem. Many years ago, a scientist called Jenna Jambeck did a calculation on the back of an envelope and said, I wonder how much plastic is in the ocean, right? And she had no measurements, zero measurements. What she did was she said, okay, let's take all the unmanaged waste within 35 miles of the coast anywhere in the world, and let's imagine that just jumps into the ocean. How much would it be? And she goes, 10 million tons. So whenever you see H. Fist Johnson, who's the head of Johnson, he uses that number. Ellen MacArthur Foundation uses that number. World Wildlife Fund, World Greenpeace, every one of these NGOs who wants you to save the planet, and they'll give you that number, 8 to 10 million, 12 million tons, next to a big juicy donate now button. And that was a complete guess by Jenna Jambeck, right? And you think, with no measurements, right? Just based on nothing. And the problem with that is we now have decades of studies where ships have gone up and down with the net looking for this ocean, the plastic that Jenna says should be there, and they can't find it. They're like, where's the missing plastic? It doesn't. And then they finally said, oh, well, we can't find it because it doesn't exist. There's like 6,000 tons a year going into the ocean, which is still too much, right? But it's not 10 million tons. So people are talking about a crisis and they're buying boats and they're floating, they're going around, they're doing studies, they're getting donations by the handful, they're getting hundreds of millions of dollars based on an ocean plastic crisis that was made up. And that's the sad part.
What does happen, because, like you said, 6,000 tons of plastic is still too much. Why is it too much? What happens to plastic when it does get into the ocean? Like, does it disrupt certain ecosystems?
Oh, no. I mean, ideologically, it's too much. I'm not in favor of any plastic in the ocean, right? But there's no effect. So scientists looked at that. They looked at microplastic in the ocean, right? And they said that there's negligible effect. Like, there's more than 100 times too little to cause any impact on anything. I can send you a peer-reviewed study that says that. It's just nothing. It's a tiny part of dust. You think there's not particles in the ocean? There's clay, there's cellulose, there's everything in the ocean. There's tons of particles in the ocean, and plastic is a tiny fraction not doing anything, according to scientists. Complete nonsense. And here's the thing. I have a whole webpage. If you type in fake turtle straw story in Google, it'll take you to my website where I literally say, we contacted the authors of this, that picture, that movie you just mentioned, 200 million people have seen a turtle with a straw up its nose. So if you watch the movie, they're like, what is it? Is it a worm? Is it a worm? Right? And then somebody says, oh no, I think it's a straw. And then they say, what's it made of? And she says, he bit on it. He says it's plastic. So I wrote to them and said, did you ever analyze that object? And they said, no. And I said, how do you know it was a straw? And they said, oh, we don't. So 200 million people have seen a video of a turtle with a plastic straw with zero evidence it was plastic and zero evidence it was a straw. And that's the world we live in. Make up some crazy nonsense that will go viral and the truth will never catch up.
I just Googled fake turtle plastic straw, and sure enough, your website, Phantom Plastics, comes up and talks about the myth of this.
Yeah. And I quote them word for word in it, like I always do.
Oh. So what has been the blowback for you, right? Because I always want to know the people that are coming on the podcast. So I did some Google search, did some AI search, and I'm like, well, is Dr. Chris a shill and a paid lobbyist, and does he have any controversy? And all the knowledge of ChatGPT and Perplexity and Google, the only thing it could tell me is that some people have considered him incorrect, right? There's nothing about some expose about you being a paid lobbyist for Exxon or anything like that. But I have to imagine when people get emotional about the environment, they can get real crazy, almost to a level of violence crazy. So what has the blowback been for you of speaking this truth?
Yeah. Well, in the beginning, it was brutal because I started and I was the only one saying any of this stuff. And it was so counter what people believe, because if you repeat a lie enough times, anyone will believe it, no matter if they have an IQ of 200. That's called the illusory truth effect. So everyone's already been brainwashed, and the response was brutal. I'm only on LinkedIn, right? Because I'm one person working unpaid in my spare time. I don't have time to cover all the social media. So I just focus on LinkedIn. And I would wake up to 30 hate mails every morning for months. And then suddenly, almost in a period of a week after a couple of years of abuse, it sort of shifted because people had checked out. Every time I post, I cite the study, like I said, word for word, and I give you a link. And after a while, people realize, holy moly, everything this guy said is right. When I click the link, it really says that. The peer-reviewed science really says that. Even one guy saw my keynote and loved it, but he hired a fact checker. He spent hundreds of dollars to have somebody fact check 13 things that I'd said, and they all checked out. He even said in the next time I met the guy, he stood up in front of the audience and said, I fact checked this guy, and it's all true. So it kind of shifted around. There still are people who hate, because once you believe something, it takes it's called cognitive dissonance. You probably know what that is, right? That's when you don't want to reprogram your brain. It's just too much work. It's just easier to keep going with the lies. So some people, no matter how many studies, even if I were to send them all 30 studies I did that to somebody a couple of days ago on bags, right? They still wouldn't change their mind. They're like, oh, but, there's the moon's in the wrong phase. They'll come up with any excuse not to consider evidence. And that's kind of sad.
So where does it go from here for you? Because you've written these books, you're giving them away for free. So it's not like there's a monetary value here. Right. I mean, does this just all go back to proving your daughter's 10th grade science teacher wrong? Is this an ego thing now, or what does this mean for you?
There's a couple things. First, as I said, I'm a problem solver. And once you really understand a problem, solving it becomes really easy. So let me give you an example. The one thing that's really bugs people, if you check out all the things people think that they hate plastics for, they don't really, and I can prove that to you, like materials use, waste. It's not true. The one thing they really hate is how ugly the litter is. right? They're suing Pepsi for dropping litter, for pollution, which is actually litter, and so forth. And if you look at the science on that, we know that litter is dropped by people, and the courts agree. You can't blame the manufacturer. You can't go and buy some potato chips, drop it on the floor, and then blame the manufacturer. That's just dumb, and it's not the law, and it's not science either. We literally watch these people dropping it on purpose. And once you realize it's people who are at fault, the solutions to that are education, deposits, and fines. So it's so simple. Once you know the problem, it's human behavior. We need to find ways of correcting the behavior, encouraging good behavior. And this is also why some countries don't have any litter, right? Some countries are spick and span. Look at Japan, look at Singapore, right? Because they're behaving properly and they've got cleaning procedures in place. Other countries where they'll take a picture of a bunch of stuff on the beach, that's where people choose to drop litter, and well, hey, that's where we find a lot of litter. So this is why there are regional variations. It depends on how the people there choose to behave. And pretty much all the other things that I mentioned are solvable. We have the solutions. If you look at the science, the solutions become obvious. So that's the positive. We have solutions that work. The negative part is I'm working alone, unfunded, and the people I'm up against have professional marketing people. They got hundreds of millions of dollars, and they're making money from this. And I'm not making money from telling the truth. I'm sharing it for free. So that's a problem. I can never win because I'm up against people. Telling lies is far more lucrative. You can make up lies are so much more exciting than the truth that you can never really win. But you've got to stand for something in your life, right? Even if you're fighting a fight that you know that you'll lose, it's still sometimes worth fighting just for the principle of it.
Hey there, Scott Groves with a quick interruption to the podcast. Sorry about that, but I just want to take a quick minute to announce our sponsors here for the podcast, and that sponsor is me, Scott Groves. It's actually the revenue that we generate through doing mortgages here at Neo Home Loans, and the money that we generate from the coaching program that I run, Consolidated Coaching for Loan Officers, coaching by loan officers for loan officers, that helps support this podcast. I really started this in 2021 as a passion project during COVID, and we're excited to bring you a new episode every week, but this only happens if I'm making money in my real full-time job. So please, if you or somebody you know is looking to buy, sell, or refinance a house, our team is licensed in almost every state in the country. And if you know a loan officer who's looking for sales coaching, personal development coaching, lead generation coaching, please get in touch with us. Scott at the Scott Groves team. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love for you to support our other endeavors, which is mortgage financing and loan officer coaching, which allows this podcast to exist. Now back to your regularly scheduled programming.
Yeah. So give us some education, right? Because obviously you have an expertise above and beyond 99.9% of people in the world, much less, well, probably scientists in the world, much less people in the world. Give us some education about how much more positive is the human experience in 2025 because of plastics? So I don't know if you want to do that, if you want to take us back to a time before plastics. You mentioned one thing that I never thought of is like, okay, 4% of all oil goes towards plastic productions, but it's basically a net positive because of how much it saves on the consumption of that other 96% of fossil fuels. So can you kind of, I know this sounds weird, can you give us a history of plastic and like how much better Scott Groves' life is because plastic exists? Because as I'm looking around me, half my desk, half my car, everything is plastic.
Right. Okay, there's a few points to touch on there. First is, and this will blow your mind, plastic is 0.5% of material we use.
Really?
Yes. So we're talking all of our policies, all of our talking, all these NGOs are spending 100% of their time and money talking about 0.5% of our problem. If anyone was really worried that we were drowning in materials or we had too much waste, they would not be talking about plastics. They would be talking about the other 99% as well, but they're not. So that shows that it's kind of a racism type of thing. It's a discrimination against plastic, right? It's not logical based. It's like, I think my house is a mess. I go and clean my cutlery drawer 100 times. I'm not going to make an impact, right? But that's what we're doing today. We're just spinning our wheels and wasting our time, looking virtuous, obsessing over nothing.
Wait, so only 0.5? Because I'm looking around. Okay, I'm looking around my room right now, and I've got, the plastic frame around my TV, the plastic frame around my picture, the plastic that this mouse is made out of.
Yes.
What is all the other stuff? What's the other 99.5?
Well, here's the funny thing. Your house is invisible to you. It's made of wood. It's made of concrete. That's the major thing. And metal. Wood, concrete, and metal are the other 99%, and it's completely invisible to us. All we see is the pictures on the wall and the mouse in our hand, and the rest of it's like it doesn't even there. It's like some sort of mental error that we've got in our brain. So that's actually in the book. You can ask ChatGPT, if you give me the weight of my house and tell me the weight of the contents and how much that is of plastic. And I did that, and it's in the book, and it's just a tiny amount. So somehow the rest of all this stuff's invisible to us. So that's one point. Your second point, say something positive about plastic. I strenuously try never to say anything positive about plastic. There's nothing positive in the first book. If you look at my LinkedIn post, there's nothing positive. I never say plastic is employing people, which the industry likes to say. I never say plastic is helping healthcare and all of that stuff. I hate that because it sounds so cheap and cheesy. On the other hand, a university professor who teaches from my book at Case Western, he said, please write something positive about plastic in your second book because it was missing from the first book. And if you're going to give a truly balanced picture, you have to talk about the positives as well, because there's two sides of every equation, like you just said with oil, right? So I said, okay, Gary, I'll do what you said, but I still couldn't bring myself to go rah about anything plastic because it just still felt like against my nature. So what I did instead was I asked ChatGPT, tell me what would happen if plastic were gone right now. And ChatGPT said civilization would collapse immediately because every computer chip is made with plastic. Every wire in going to your house is insulated with plastic. Everything is, we wouldn't have electricity, right? We wouldn't have the internet. We wouldn't have cell phones. Everything would just stop immediately. Even though it's a very small part, it's a very important part. More, and not only that, we would never get off the planet without plastic and humanity would die at some point. So that's the way I'd like to phrase it. You can ask ChatGPT yourself, or you can just imagine for a second what would happen if all the insulation was removed in a second. There would be, we'd be thrown back to the Stone Ages in about 25 minutes.
So what are some of the other myths about plastic, right? Like we talked on the microplastics and the plastic in the ocean. What are some of the things that you've heard that you're just shaking your head and saying, how many times do I have to refute this? How many more studies do I have to post on LinkedIn? Like, what's the top 2 or top 5 Dr. Chris shakes his head when people talk about plastic?
Yeah. Well, we've touched on some of the most important ones, how little it is of the total thing. So let's just give you an idea. If you were to summarize this in a really good nut, it would be plastic is less than 1% of anything you can measure pretty much, right? Whether it's dust, whether it's anything. So it is there, but it's not a big thing. And if you look at applications of plastic, 93% of those applications, plastic reduces impact compared to metal, glass, or wood or cotton, right? So if you want a plastic alternative, it will usually cost you more. And 9 times out of 10, you'll be making things worse. You'll be leaving a worse planet for your children. You'll be making things worse for yourself. And all because you couldn't find 5 minutes to check the facts before you acted. That's what I would summarize it as. People are with good intentions are making things worse and spending more doing it. And that's kind of sad.
So I'm thinking right now, the picture frame example, when we talk about that Lifecycle study, the plastic picture frame going around my poster that says do epic shit, that has less environmental impact than if I had gotten a nice, pretty wood frame over the life cycle of that material.
Great point. So the only thing I've ever seen consistently greener than plastic is wood. So, and I posted that.
We villainize that too. So
yeah, if you can make something out of a chunk of wood, like a wine cork, that is greener than plastic. And also wooden pallets, that seems to be like the wooden pallet, depending on the design. But in general, that might be lower impact, the pallets that you ship things on. So maybe a decking for your house, that might be greener, made out of wood. So a chunk of wood is usually greener than even the greenest plastic. But other than that, it's greener than cotton, greener than wool, greener than the paper, metal, or glass in pretty much every situation.
I'm thinking of some funny YouTube conspiracy video of like getting rid of plastic bottles. It's all just a ploy by the glass industry because
yes,
that's the new thing. If you live in LA, which I did for most of my life, and you go to a yoga studio with a bunch of evolved, hippie environmentalists, every single person is going to have a glass water bottle because that is them showing that they don't allow their children to drink out of plastics and BPAs and get cancer and yada, yada, yada. And I mean, you would be like ostracized if you showed up for a yoga class in California with a plastic water bottle instead of steel or glass.
Yeah. Well, they're a bunch of Muppets, in my opinion, because if you want to do the right thing, check to make sure it is the right thing, because they're spending more to make things worse. I've got studies on the toxins that come out of glass. Do you think glass doesn't give off particles? Oh, yeah, there's glass particles. They've actually replaced glass in hospital. You know, there's ampules for drugs.
Yeah.
They replaced glass ampules with plastic ones because the glass ones were giving too many glass shards. I've got studies on that. They've studied all the metals that come leaching out of the glass. Lead is a famous one, but there's tons of other metals that come out. There's actual cases of people getting toxic amounts of stuff out of glass. But of course, nobody talks about that. They assume it to be this wonder material that's completely inert, and it's just not true. So it's important to... Thomas Sowell once said something really smart. He said, when you hear a concept, ask yourself 3 questions. What are the alternatives? How much will it cost? And what kind of evidence do you have? And those are great rules to live by. And those are exactly the questions no one's asking when it comes to plastic. We have alternatives, but where's your evidence that they're better?
Do me a favor and say that again, because now I know we're definitely aligned, because Thomas Sowell is one of my favorite authors. I think he's a national treasure.
I've got his book. I do too. I've got his books behind me. He's 91 now. Discrimination and Disparities is right there behind me. He's a genius.
I'm constantly buying people copies of the book Basic Economics, and I'm like, hey, based on some of your recent Facebook posts, I really need you to read this.
Yeah.
What were those 3 questions again by Thomas Sowell?
So it's compared to what, or what are the alternatives? How much will it cost? And what kind of evidence do you have?
Yeah.
Those are the 3 questions that no one's asking when it comes to plastic. And that's unfortunate. So the best economics book, by the way, is Economics in One Lesson. That is incredible. It's really small. There's no mathematics or anything in it. And it's a work of genius. It's by I've got it behind me, I think. Yeah, Economics in One Lesson by Hazlitt. Yeah, it's one of the most famous books of all time.
All right, I'm buying it right now. Economics in One Lesson.
What one book would you recommend for me that I should read?
Oh, there's too many. It depends if you want to do sales or I coach salespeople for a living. So it's like the best sales book ever written is either The Ultimate Sales Machine or a book by a gentleman named Chris Voss called Never Split the Difference. To me, anybody who works in business, sales, negotiations, never split the difference. Chris Voss was the head of the FBI International Negotiation Hostage Team. And when he got out, he's like, oh, wait. All of this same stuff that we use in hostage negotiations works in business and persuasive arguments and whatnot. So Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss is one of my all-time favorite books.
Okay, I'll look it up. I've read ones by Herb Cohen. He was involved in the Iran-Contra affair. He's a good negotiator. He's done some funny books. Yeah, terrific. So anyway, my big thing is not for plastic, for against anything. People start with the solution, right? They start with where they want to get, and then they just manufacture a path there. Just make wise decisions based on things that are true. If you want to buy something else, do it because you want to do it, not because somebody lied to you about and tried to sell you their material or tried to get a donation out of you. That's my big thing. And don't teach our kids nonsense at schools, because they'll grow up with nonsense in their head. That's what's driving me.
So I have to ask you, because you do have this scientific background and all the letters after your name, has portions of the scientific community been captured by this same type of virtue signaling as you mentioned?
Yeah.
Or are they tailoring the studies to meet the outcome? Like, is there some fraud in academia about this? Or is it like, no, all the papers I pull up seem to support the truth. It's just the truth's not being told.
Okay, that's great. That's a great question. So on average in academia, my rule of thumb is if you read 5 peer-reviewed papers, you can throw 3 immediately in the trash because they're so bad. The 4th one will have something useful in it, but it still won't be a good paper. And the last one will be a gem that really tells you something, right? Where the conclusions are solid, the experiments are solid. So when I look for these things, I found the answer to every question that I've ever asked when it comes to microplastics, ocean plastics, whether plastics goes right through us, whether they're toxic, how fast do they degrade. The answer to every single question is known. So people come to me asking for, who should I pay to do a study? And I'm like, I've got the answer right here on my laptop. I'll send you a peer-reviewed study. So in general, the science is done, the answers are known, and there is credible science. However, when it comes to microplastics, that is an exception. Scientists, not just me, right, but others, I've been calling it out for years, but at least 3 other groups of scientists have said most microplastic studies are complete trash and they're flawed. And I mean, they're so flawed that your dog could work it out. So they literally take 1 million times too much plastic compared to what's really in the environment, and they do the experiment on that. Oxygen's 20%.
A million times.
A million times too much, and go, oh, look, the fishies can't find their food. You're like, oh, no wonder if you put a million tennis balls in my house flying around, I wouldn't be able to find my hamburger either, right? So this is the lunacy. And if it was up to me, I'm pretty brutal. I would send these people, I would shoot them in a rocket right off the planet headed towards the sun. That is how bad this science is. Doing a million times too high a concentration is irresponsible and negligent. And another thing that they do is they pick a special kind of plastic that nobody in the world has ever been exposed to. It's not regular plastic. It's a special kind that you can only find in the laboratory. And they do all of and it behaves completely unlike any other real plastic, right? So that's another mistake that they make.
Wait, what's the name of this super secret dangerous plastic?
So they take cross-linked polystyrene beads, which are fluorescent, and they're charged, so they stick to everything. And they're like, look, these beads are sticking to your cells, and they're doing it. It's like, yeah, because you used a special type of plastic, which is unlike anything in the world. So that's another mistake. Other scientists are so desperate that they soak the plastic particles in poison, and then they do their study and say, oh, look, there's poison coming out of the plastic. You're like, no kidding, man. That's the same poison that you soaked them in before you did the experiment. That is how desperate people are to get fame and fortune and funding. It's pathetic. So I've called out studies and literally not just said that they're invalid, but proved to people, and I'm not the only one doing it, calling out this horrendously bad science when it comes to microplastics.
So, I've got a job. I've got a family. I've got jujitsu I have to do in the morning.
I saw that. Yeah, cool. Blue belt, right? You just got your blue belt?
I just got my purple belt, actually, recently.
Purple? Oh, wow.
Feeling good about that. But
congratulations.
For the average layperson like me, when I see some headline study, it doesn't matter whether it's CNN or Fox News or whatever about plastics, like what chance does somebody like me have to getting the correct information when I don't have 2 hours a day to read from Clemson? It's like, okay, you seem very persuasive. You seem very authentic and notable and honest. I trust you. But maybe there could be somebody else on this podcast who's telling me about the evils of plastic. And how do you even know who to believe or what to believe anymore? And obviously post-COVID, and we don't have to get into that, we've seen this where the science can tell you whatever you want it to tell you based on what side of the argument you're on.
Yeah, that's a great point. So there's a couple things to watch out for. One is, does your spider sense start tingling? I couldn't believe it. The most recent scare was we have a spoonful of plastic in our brain. You would have to have a spoonful of plastic in your brain to be that gullible. I met some top people, some top policy makers not that long ago, and they all burst out laughing when I said it. Really? Are you telling me I got a spoonful it was just on the morning TV shows, it did its rounds on the internet. And the funny thing is, I debunked that study. If you go to my website, you can see all about plastic in the brain. And I debunked the study a year before it was even officially released. They used a method which other scientists say, don't use this method because it doesn't work. And that's the method that they used. They use a method that claims to find plastic when nobody in the rest of the world believes that method works. It can't tell the difference between plastic and fat and lipids and other stuff that's supposed to be in your brain. So this is literally known to be nonsense, but everyone picked up on it. And if you try and tell the truth, no journalist is interested in that because that's really boring, right? That doesn't scare anyone. So that's one thing.
You wrote this in 2023, and this hyperbolic story just made the rounds about 6 months ago.
Yeah.
It's a micro and nanoplastic breach the blood-brain barrier. Basically talking about how this is just a dangerous fake study.
Yeah, and if you scroll down on the page, it talks about the microplastics spoonful as well, and how that's nonsense. And I link to the study, as you'll see. I quote the study that says it's invalid, and I link to the study so you can read it. So it's all above board. That's one thing I did with my new book, because the green groups are worried about their donations when I expose their scam. And so they'll say this is some lone scientist with a contrarian opinion. So I sent my book, which cites 250 studies, to professors all around the world. And imagine you're me. Imagine you're a fellow of the Royal Society of Chemistry and the Institute for Materials Mining and Materials, Minerals and Mining. And you were a scam artist, right? Or a shill. And you sent your work to professors all around the world. Would you do that if you were a shill, right? You would just be exposed and as a laughingstock by the scientific community, right? But no, I quoted every study, I cited it, I gave the links, and I sent it to all these professors all around the world. They all read it and endorsed it. And you can see the endorsements on the website. This has been checked out for years now. Nobody's ever found a single error in anything that I've cited. I think I found an error once and corrected it.
So we can trust our spidey sense, right? I can pretty much trust anything that, or not trust anything that has a donate button next to it.
Yeah, that's a good rule of thumb.
When your publicist reached out, she didn't say, hey, here's this guy, Dr. Chris, who has a keynote that he's trying to sell, or he's launching a book and he really wants to get a bunch of sales on Amazon. She was like, this guy just wants to let people know the truth about plastic. I'm like, that's what I want to have on.
Yeah, thanks. Well, thank you. I really appreciate that, Scott. It is a warning sign to see the donate now button. That is one thing that, and here's another one. The World Wildlife Fund says we eat a credit card of plastic a week. I mean, does that sound plausible to any rational person if you really sit down and think about it? And so science says that would take 10,000 years to do. So that is the magnitude of whopper these people are prepared to tell.
Wait, okay, because this is one that I've heard before, right? This has made its rounds on social media.
Yeah.
I've heard the thing like, oh, you eat a credit card worth of plastic because at every stage of the food production, they're using plastic and plastic cutting boards and plastic knives and all these micro particles from they're breaking off. And so like that sounds kind of plausible to me. Like maybe I don't know, maybe my carne asado burrito that I had today for lunch, maybe they've been using that plastic cutting board for too long and I'm getting a bunch of plastic shavings in my burrito. I don't know.
Yeah.
You're saying that lie. When they actually do the studies, it would take 10,000 years of me digesting food to get a credit card's worth of plastic into my system.
Right. And it's non-toxic anyway. Yeah. So that's what the best study says. And that's the funny thing. If you think about that thing about a spoonful of plastic in your brain, that was 6 grams. I think that they said it was 6 or 8 grams. So it would take you 20,000 years to eat that much plastic. How are you going to get more plastic in your brain than you've ever eaten in your life? It's just impossible, right? It's like saying, I said to a reporter once, I said to her, she just couldn't get this right. So I said, are you worried about any lions escaping from your back garden? She said, no, I don't have any lions in my back garden. I said, exactly. How is something supposed to escape if it was never there in the first place? And here's another one. So Congress has set aside $15 billion to replace lead pipes, right? Because we all know lead's toxic. So they've got to replace these lead pipes. And there's an environmental group, the one from Michael Bloomberg, who's out saying we should use copper. Right? Because it's the cheapest, safest, best solution, or they didn't say cheapest, but they said it was the safest and greenest solution. And so I checked the science on that, and it's just not true. If you look at Lifecycle studies, metal pipes are vastly worse than plastic pipes every single time, and they cost 5 times more as well. And copper is toxic. Above 1 part per million concentration, copper is toxic. So the EPA literally has the lead copper rule, which means they test my faucet water every year and all around the country, because lead and copper are so toxic in drinking water that they have to test it all the time in every house, all around America, by law. And this group, who claims to be an environmental group, is telling us to use a type of pipe which is 5 times worse for the environment, according to every study ever done, costs 5 times more, and is toxic. That's the kind of lunacy that's going on. And I called them out on it. I literally debunked their report and said, this is just nonsense. But USA Today covered that. I debunked it there, and they published a follow-up story. And then the Washington Post covered that. I thought, okay, that's died down. That's debunked. The Washington Post covered it again a couple of weeks ago, or a couple of months ago. And I talked to the reporter, and she said, but what about the vinyl chloride monomer that's in the PVC? And I said, yeah, that was a problem in the 1970s when they discovered it, and it hasn't been a problem since. Right. So that was a problem.
You explain that, because that's a big one, right? Like the environmentalists will say, you got to check your bottles for the BP 579, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Can you explain? Because this is something that happens, and I'll use a corollary. In the mortgage world, up until 1982, which is just a few years after my birth and decades before I started doing mortgage, back before 1982, there was this thing. If you were a veteran and you got a VA loan, there was a bunch of fees that the seller had to pay on behalf of the buyer because they were trying to protect veterans. Okay. You go talk to a realtor today in 2025, and they'll say, oh, I don't want to accept a VA loan. My seller's got to pay all these fees on behalf of the buyer. I'm like, that hasn't existed for 43 years.
Right.
So I think there's a corollary here where maybe there was some dangers in some of the stuff that was leaching out of the PVC pipe. We have since fixed that. But can you explain that? Because I think that's an important one for how some of these bad thoughts and bad science were able to minds.
Okay, that's a great point. So when you make plastics, you start with small molecules and you chain them together into really big molecules, like DNA, or that's proteins that we're made of, DNA that we're made of, collagen that we're made of. All of these things are polymers, just long molecules. And those are some of the safest molecules in the world, right? Even the EPA has an exemption saying polymers are in a special class because they're so incredibly safe, because they're so big they can't go anywhere. right? It's like a boulder. You're not worried about a boulder from your neighbor's yard jumping into your yard. It's never going to happen. But a piece of dust from your neighbor's yard could get into your yard, right? So that's why polymers are so intrinsically safe and recognized as such. So anyway, these small molecules, sometimes you'll have a tiny amount of them left, which would be the vinyl chloride in the case of PVC. So in the 1970s, they found really low amounts, but they were worried about them. So I don't know if there was ever any harm caused or not. It was in the 70s, right, when I was a kid, like you just said. But anyway, they recognized that they could do better, let's say. And they came in with these regulations. They took care of the whole problem. And this green group, so fake green group from Michael Bloomberg, who don't actually favor the environment, they favor anti-plastic, brought this up like it was a real problem to the Washington Post and got believed, and by USA Today and got believed. So I told a woman from the Washington Post, no, that was addressed decades and decades ago. And then she was so desperate to keep ragging on plastics, she said to me, but what about pipes that are in the ground now that were made in the 70s? Is it still coming out? Is that a problem? And I wanted to say to her, do you think if I fart right now, you can still smell it 30 years later? Vinyl chloride is a gas, right? I mean, but this is how insanely keen people are to find some way to find a problem that isn't there and to cling to, you know, the hate that they just want to show somehow. So that's how nutty things are. People are... it was awful. I didn't say that to her in the end. I used a different analogy, but
please tell me, after you explained that the vinyl chloride was a gas, that she understood that that would have dissipated over the last 40 years, or did she still not get it?
I'm not 100% sure. If you read the article, I was quoted, but I still don't think that she totally got that this is just bogus stuff made up by a fake environmental group. So, and here, let me tell you another thing, because one of the scariest things I ever heard was, you know, this microplastic in the body. We got plastic particles in our body and it's moving around. So I'm not a biologist. I'd never heard of that before. So I started checking the science, and as always, I was incredibly thorough. So I found out that every kind of particles in our body, you know, because we're breathing it, and our body, as long as there's not too many of them, is used to it. We have macrophages that wash them out of our lungs and move them out, and we have systems for that, as long as you're not in the desert breathing huge amounts of dust or something. So every kind of, we got soot in our bodies, we got zinc oxide from sunscreens, we got titanium oxide, we've got cerium oxide, we've got diesel exhaust. Everything you can imagine gets to some extent in our body, has been measured there, not theoretically, it's actually measured there. And less than 1% of it's plastic. But of course, no one else, again, is talking about the other 99%, which includes proven toxins and carcinogens. They're all just talking about the plastic one, as if that's the only one there, right? But you see what I mean? You see how skewed that is? Imagine you're a scientist and you find this happened. They actually measured particles in blood. They found 99 other particles, one plastic one. And I thought, hallelujah, finally a study. Every other study throws away the other 99 particles and says, look, we found plastic. And everyone thinks in the public that plastic was the only thing there. So finally, I found the studies where they didn't throw away all the other stuff and they actually reported the whole thing correctly. So plastic is a tiny fraction. And here's the mind-boggling part I wanted to get to. It turns out we've known about plastic particles in the body since the year 1844, when the Germans reported it. And I cite that study in my book, and with a link to it. So so they didn't find plastic in the body because that's too long ago, but we've known about particles in the body and moving around. It's called translocation since the year 1844. So many of the things you hear, which are presented as news, are not new, and they're not scary either. So I saw a headline, National Geographic, microplastic found on Everest. You're like, no kidding, man, you found dust. Well done. Since when is I found dust newsworthy? Imagine I call up the editor of the New York Times and say, hey man, I found some dust on my keyboard. Can I get on the front page? It's like, there's another one like plastic found in the bottom of the Mariana Trench or whatever. You're like, yeah, you found dust. It's like, what else did you find? Plenty of sand, which gives you, that's quartz, right? Gives you cancer. Nobody's worried about sand. That's everywhere. So it's just insane how people are consistently obsessing over things which are not a threat and ignoring things that are a proven threat that could give you cancer. And so you only have so much worry energy in your life, right? You can't spend all your time worrying about everything. So let's find the things that actually are a threat and worry about those and stop obsessing over things that are insignificant.
So I want to ask a bit of a controversial question that maybe you don't have an answer to. If you could wave a magic wand and all of this science, quote unquote, and funding and fear mongering going to plastic could shift over here to this thing that really is causing damage to ourselves causing cancer, destroying the environment. Is there something or some things that you point to that you're like, this is where we should really have our finger on the pulse? Plastic is not the evil. It's, like you said, the zinc from the sunscreen or something like that. Is there anything in your mind that you just can't believe isn't bigger on the radar of the American populace versus this conundrum over plastic?
If you look at surveys of people and what they're really worried about, it's not plastic. It doesn't even make the top 20 or even 50, I think. People are worried about wars. They're worried about world hunger. They're worried about people dying of AIDS. They're worried about polio coming back. There are actual things, and you can find this. There's data on this, right? What's actually important? What's killing people right now? I mean, stop buying your flipping glass bottle you talked about. Send that $5 you just wasted and send it to somebody in Africa. They'll go to school for a year with that money, right? I mean, this is just people in the first world making up problems so that they can feel good about themselves and have something to fret over. If you genuinely want to make a difference, help somebody who's poor and starving.
Oh man, you are speaking my language. I think over a cocktail we can get real aggressive.
Hey, I'm on for that, man. When do we meet up?
Where do you live, by the way?
I'll even try a cigar, which I don't normally smoke, just in honor of you.
Perfect.
Near Cincinnati.
Oh, okay. And do you still teach out there, or you do full-time consulting?
Yeah, so my main business is still consulting. That's what I do. I help people solve problems. Yeah.
Nice. Last question before my last questions. Obviously, this journey, you had a scientific background in plastics, but this journey started because you got pissed off at your daughter's teacher. Is there some other area of debunking that needs your attention, like needs Superman Dr. Chris to come in and debunk this other area of fake science and environmentalism? Like, is there something on your radar where it's like, I wouldn't choose to do this, but if I had to read another 5,000 papers on X topic, I might be interested?
I like your question. Creative people have weird hobbies and they're interested in more than one thing. That's why what you're doing right now, so you can relate. And whenever it gets into any topic, I check the science, right? And so one of them is this diversity and inclusion stuff. So for example, and I've posted on this and it's unpopular. I don't get many likes, but I don't care. I don't care about being liked. As I said, care about being right. So I present the science. Have you ever listened to Jordan Peterson?
Yeah, frequently.
Right. So, for example, 3M and all the big companies are trying to get more women in science, right? Which sounds very virtuous when you think about it, except for if you check the science, this is what the science says. They've done a study of 450,000 people across 67 countries, right? And they found out the more egalitarian the country is, like Sweden and Finland and Denmark and Iceland, where men and women are exactly the same on everything you can measure, you find fewest men in nursing and fewest women in science in the countries where those people have the absolute freedom to do whatever they want, where it's the most egalitarian, where it's the most fair. And it only makes sense when you think about it, because if you take away all restrictions, people will do exactly what they want to do. So that's why there's fewest men in nursing and fewest women in science in the countries where they have absolute equality. And on the other hand, there's other countries where you get a lot more men in nursing and women in science. And then they wondered, well, why is that? Why is it social programming? Why are they doing it differently in different countries? So they studied that too. And they offered a toy car or a toy doll to babies so young they can't even speak. So they can't be socially programmed yet, right? Because they're too young. And the boy on average picks the car and the girl picks the doll. And the reason is that on average, women are more interested in people and men are more interested in things. And that's why women go into nursing and teaching careers, and men go into science and engineering because they can mess with things all day long, which is what they're interested in. On average, right? This is a distribution curve, but on average, the people most interested in things are men, people most interested in people are women. So that's where that difference comes from. And then if you don't believe that, and this is the kicker, right? They did the same experiment on monkeys and they got the same result. So there's no way they can say this is socially programmed and we're telling our girls that they can't be good scientists. I would love it if my girls turn out to be scientists because they want to. So here's the conclusion. People are trying to get to 50% women in science, and the only way to get there would be to force women into jobs they don't want. Who does that help?
No one.
Right.
And the fact that we need a scientific study to prove what we kind of already know intrinsically through our life experience, which can sometimes be misleading, it's just wild to me.
Yeah.
It's a wild time, man.
So I'm a crusader for justice. Whenever I see something that just is wrong, I'm the person to say, look, that's just not right. Here are the facts. Please have a look. Yeah. And most people don't respond to that.
No.
They don't want to see the facts. They're not very interested.
I appreciate the way that you spoke to us today in a taking complex ideas and breaking them down very easily to digest. And I do believe that there are people that have the kindest of hearts and the best of intentions, and maybe they're just a little bit misdirected.
Yes.
And I won't be able to get those people to read, 50 studies from Clemson on paperbacks. How do you go about talking to people that are emotional about these topics so that you can help to shift them to reality and truth? Because, I've tried having similar conversations in areas that I know a lot about, right? Whether it's mortgage or finance or whatnot. And once somebody is emotionally connected to an idea, good luck. I know there's certain ideas I'm emotionally connected to that you're just not going to be able to change my mind. And I'm finally old enough to say I'm aware of that.
Yeah.
But
a lot of that nonsense gets into your into your brain when you're a kid and you don't have any filters yet. So it just flies right in there, even if it's nonsensical. So I saw a thing from Pew recently, the Pew Research people. They do a study regularly. I think they update it every few years. And it's about trust in science. People don't trust politicians, but they trust scientists more, but they follow the trends over the years. And the media. So trust in the media is at an all-time low. I mean, no logical person really believes. If you were in a room of 100 people and said, put up your hand if you believe everything you read in the press, I don't think a single hand would go up, right? So this is the way to get through to people. You ask them, do you trust everything you read in the newspaper and online? And they'll say no. And then you say to them, where is 100% of everything you believe now about plastics coming from? How many studies have you actually read? How many scientific studies have you read? Oh, none. Everything's coming from internet headlines, isn't it? Everything's coming from the media you just told me you don't trust. So please, just for 1 second, open the doorway for the idea that what you have been told now may not be right, because you just told me you don't trust that source. Please just open your mind a little bit to the idea of looking at some evidence backed up by, study after study after study. So that's a way of making people realize, oh yeah, I get it now. Everything I know now, because everyone's an armchair expert, right? They think they can spend 2 minutes on Reddit and they're Einstein or they're Stephen Hawking or something. It's just not true. Everyone's kind of got their ego out of whack with the amount of actual information they've got. I've got literal people every day telling me, a software programmer telling me that I'm wrong about whatever. And I'm like, really, man? How big is your ego? How out of whack are you with reality? I wouldn't come in and tell him how to program in Python or Fortran, right? And he shouldn't be telling me about plastics. And here's a mind-blowing thing. People will say to me, we can't trust a plastics guy to tell us about plastics. I'm like, oh, really? Who would you trust? Your car mechanic? Your hairdresser? I mean, if you've got a heart attack, you don't go to the hospital and say, no, I don't want to see the doctor. I want to see the janitor. I mean, this is how desperate people are to not listen to the truth or the evidence about plastic, that to the very idea that anyone who's an expert in it, their opinion is automatically invalid, no matter how much evidence is behind it. That is just wackadoodle. It shouldn't. But that's the world we live in.
Next time you're in Vegas for a keynote or a consultation with a company, we have to get a drink on the schedule.
You're on.
I always end with two questions because I keep telling myself I'm going to start with these questions and I forget. The first question is like, what is Chris looking forward to? We're recording this in June of 2025. It'll probably come out in a month or so. So going into the second half of the year, what are you personally or professionally or politically or whatever most looking forward to? And then second question, because I am a movie nerd, what is your favorite movie and why? Because I feel like I can learn a lot about somebody based on their favorite movie and why. So what are you looking forward to and favorite movie and why?
I live in the present, so I don't really look forward to anything. It's a terrible answer, but my childhood taught me never look forward to anything and you'll never be disappointed.
Oh my goodness. There's something there we got to unpack.
Because if you're looking forward to things, you're only just opening yourself up for disappointment. You've got this dream vacation pictured and then it rains for a week or whatever. I have no expectations. In fact, I expect to lose this battle I'm fighting now, as I say, because I'm working unfunded and on my own. So I don't have anything I'm looking forward to. I guess in general, my hope would be that more people check evidence and start doing things that make sense based on it. And what was the second one?
Second one.
My favorite movie. My favorite movie of all time is probably The Usual Suspects.
Oh, such a
I just love that movie. That was fantastic. I couldn't tell you why, but it was just so beautifully done. It was just a work of art.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the cast in that is a banger. The storytelling is amazing. The twist at the end is great.
Yeah. Yeah. Another great one for a twist at the end. What was that one called? That was a really weird indie movie when I was a kid. Can't think of the name of it now. Yeah, anyway. So Delicatessen, that's another wacko, really cool movie. Have you ever seen that one? Oh, it's a French movie. That's totally out there. You'd love it.
Okay.
It'll blow your mind. Delicatessen. It's got a cult following.
Delicatessen. I'm putting it on the radar.
Oh, The Crying Game. That's the other weird one I was thinking of. Yeah, that was one with an amazing.
Yeah. I see the meme make its rounds on social media every once in a while where it's like 46 minutes and 32 seconds into a crying game. You'll never be the same person again.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's brutal. So first of all, I appreciate the work you're doing because I know that anything we do, even if it's a passion project, it comes at a cost. Like Thomas Sowell says, it's just a study of trade-offs, and you have a lot of time to put your energy towards this to speak truth to what's going on in the science and what's not being told by the people trying to raise donations. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
I'm going to share this with a lot of people when it comes out. We will get it on the social medias, which I know that you don't contribute to because you don't have the time for that. But
I have a massive following on LinkedIn, so let me know when it goes out. I got 1.5 million views on LinkedIn last year, and I got 20,000 followers, so I'd be happy to post it up there.
And have you named your LinkedIn? Is it like LinkedIn /
It's just my name. Yeah.
Got it. And any question I forgot to ask as we finish?
No, I think it's terrific. Yeah, just in general, let's stop obsessing about minutiae and make a difference. Next time you're feeling bad, send $5 to somebody in Africa. Don't worry about what kind of can you're using.